So, hello, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm actually in New York. I'm Simon Bukel. I am the Chief Marketing Officer for the Children's Tumor Foundation. I am sitting in today for Kate Keltz, our Director of Patient Education and Engagement. And this is our Knowledge Series webinar. We have good fortune this month. Usually we do these monthly. February is the shortest month, but this month we have two. We had one yesterday on schwannomatosis. Be on the lookout for that on our YouTube channel if you missed it. And today we are here to talk about the next and newest approved treatment for NF1, Gomekli. We're very excited to have you here. We have, I think, 600 people who registered to be here today. So clearly there's a lot of interest in this. We want to thank you. Thank you for getting us to this point. It is the NF community that has gotten this approved treatment and the other approved treatment, Koselugo, and all the other things in the pipeline, which we'll post a little link later for you to do more homework on. We are going to just do a couple housekeeping things. This webinar is being captioned. So please, there is a live captioner, so please click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. We are going to take questions today to the extent that we can, again, with many hundreds of you on the call today. We will do our best to answer what we can. We cannot answer personal medical questions, so please don't get offended if it feels like we don't get to your questions. We will do our best to group together common themes, and our guest today will do his best to answer them. And let me see, I have a couple notes, want to make sure I don't forget anything. We are recording today, so this will be available on our YouTube channel. We will post that link a little bit later as well. And that's it. I think you want to hear the guest today more than you do me. So I am honored to introduce to you Dr. Christopher Moertel, who leads both the Pediatric Brain Tumor Program and the Comprehensive Neurofibromatosis Clinic at Minnesota Health Fairview. Dr. Moertel was also the lead investigator for the ReNeu clinical trial that led to the approval of Gomekli, what we're here to talk about today. Dr. Moertel is also a past co-chair of our NF Summit, and we'll give you a little more information about the summit later today, too. He also has a much longer, distinguished bio, which we're going to post in the chat rather than have me read it to you. And we're just going to turn it right over to Dr. Moertel, who will take you through everything you need to know about Gomekli. Dr. Moertel, over to you.
Thank you, Simon, and thanks to the Children's Tumor Foundation for this opportunity. I'm speaking to you from my office at the University of Minnesota today. It's a red letter day in Minnesota because, number one, I woke up to temperatures over 0 degrees Fahrenheit this morning, and that was a great cause of celebration. And number two, we have a new drug for patients with NF1, Gomekli. I first got to know Gomekli when it was PD 0365901. And then over time, it became mirdametinib. And today, with FDA approval, it's Gomekli. So I'm going to do my best to tell you the story. First, I think it's important for all of us to start off in the same place. And so I'm just going to give a little background. Gomekli is approved specifically for the treatment of plexiform neurofibroma. What are plexiform neurofibromas? First, they're non-malignant nerve sheath tumors, and they're reported to be in anywhere from 30 to 50% of people with neurofibromatosis type 1. Plexiform neurofibromas often cause morbidity, including pain, impaired quality of life, disfigurement, and increased risk for malignant transformation to MPNST later in life. No pharmacologic therapies are approved for adults with plexiform neurofibroma. There is one MEK inhibitor that is FDA approved for children, Koselugo or selumetinib. Mirdametinib is specifically, or Gomekli, is an investigational, oral, highly selective, CNS penetrant small molecule MEK inhibitor. A phase 2 trial of mirdametinib was done earlier by the NF Clinical Trials Consortium, and this demonstrated efficacy and a manageable safety profile in adults and adolescents over 16 years of age with NF1 plexiform neurofibroma. This is something I see in my clinic not infrequently. A young lady comes in with some swelling in one part of her body and tenderness. Sometimes we see overlying skin changes. We do an MRI, and this clinically detectable plexiform neurofibroma becomes a diagnosed neurofibroma. And again, clinically detectable plexiform neurofibromas happen in about 30% of people. But if we do whole body MRI looking for plexiform neurofibroma, the prevalence can actually increase to 50 to 60% in patients with NF1. Plexiform neurofibromas are really complex tumors. They're made up of a number of different cells. Schwann cells, which are the insulation around nerves, become dysregulated as a result of the neurofibromatosis alteration. These then attract mast cells that are recruited by these Schwann cells, and these mast cells can confer other properties to the tumors. Some people with plexiform neurofibroma complain about itching in the area of their tumor, and indeed, mast cells make histamine that can cause itching. Fibroblasts are the cells that make up our skin or heal our wounds, and if those are dysregulated, they proliferate abnormally also and lead to the growth of these plexiform neurofibromas. They also lay down a matrix of collagen fibers and other substances that make the tumor grow. There's other perineural-like cells, and one thing we've noticed is that these tumors attract a lot of blood vessels, so they're highly vascular, and if you try to do surgery on one of these tumors, the tumors tend to bleed a lot and make these surgeries very difficult. Brigitte Wiedemann at the National Cancer Institute taught us several years ago and shared this slide with me showing the growth rate and pattern of growth of plexiform neurofibromas. And it's become quite clear that if you're young, the growth rate can be very fast, and we can detect plexiform neurofibromas very early in life. And we see that if a 3-year-old patient has a very fast growth rate, while teenagers and adults have slower growth rates in their tumors. We define progressive disease by a plexiform neurofibroma growing in volume by more than 20%. NF1 plexiform neurofibromas can happen in a lot of different places. In the upper left, I've got it labeled cord compression. These neurofibromas can grow into the spinal canal and actually squeeze the spinal cord. And there's 2 views showing that here. You can have very large plexiform neurofibromas involving a whole leg. You can have plexiform neurofibromas, just like the one I just showed you, that involve the neck and can sometimes compromise the airway. And in the lower picture, you can see that the airway is actually pushed over and causing some distress for the patient. We've learned that surgery is certainly not the answer for these tumors. And this is a patient who's undergone multiple surgeries, and all he's got to show for it are some terrible scars and hospital stays. So having a medical answer for these tumors is very important, and CTF has been very instrumental in supporting research to provide medical therapy for these tumors for years. And this is an example of clinical trials that have gone on for many years. This is actually my patient who lived here in the greater Twin Cities area in Minnesota, but went out to the National Cancer Institute to participate in multiple trials. And the main story here is that his plexiform neurofibroma continued to grow. There was brief relief with PEG interferon, and again, brief relief with sirolimus, but it continued to grow. And he was one of the very first on the phase 1 trial of selumetinib or Koselugo that showed that these tumors could shrink. We had to pause his therapy because of a side effect. We were still learning about what these medicines do. And when we paused therapy, the tumor grew back very quickly. But when he returned to therapy on an appropriate dose, his tumor has continued to shrink. So why does all this happen to begin with? Well, NF1, the condition, results in an abnormal structure for the protein neurofibromin. Neurofibromin, which is labeled here, causes regulation of a protein called RAS. And if RAS is dysregulated, if it's hyperactivated, if you will, it drives the activation of another molecule called RAF. There's MEK, and then MEK activates ERK. And when ERK is activated, cell proliferation happens. And one of the ways we see that is in the growth of plexiform neurofibromas. I've got the green arrow on the molecule MEK because selumetinib or Koselugo, mirdametinib or Gomekli, and other drugs like trametinib all interfere with MEK and block this pathway and prevent cell proliferation and growth. So let's talk about Gomekli specifically, since that's why we're here today. I already told you about its other names. So if any of you feel academic, you can go back and do literature searches or go to ChatGPT and have ChatGPT educate you about mirdametinib and PD-0635-901. And you'll find all kinds of literature that led to this drug being able to be used in humans for a variety of conditions. Gomekli is available as a capsule, but it's also available as a dispersible tablet that can be dissolved in water. So people who can't tolerate capsules, young children, older kids or adults with an oral aversion or behavioral issues that get in the way of taking tablets, that having that dispersible tablet is really important. Like Koselugo, mirdametinib is given twice daily. It can be taken with food. You don't have to fast before or after taking this medication. And the important thing, and the new news, it's approved for both adults and children. Koselugo is just available on an FDA-approved on-label basis for children. But as many of you in the audience know, you can get it off-label, but to have an on-label indication is going to be really important so there's not so many insurance fights in the future. We did our clinical trial to prove that this medicine worked and was well tolerated. We enrolled patients who were over 2 years of age who had NF1 plexiform neurofibromas that were not amenable to surgery and causing some significant morbidity. That morbidity could be cosmetic. It could get in the way of walking, playing, breathing, peeing, all kinds of different things that really get in the way of having a good life. Our adult cohort was over 18, and we enrolled 58 patients on that cohort. The children were between the ages of 2 and 17, and there were 56 kids enrolled on the trial. And as I already told you about mirdametinib dosing forms, but we used a unique schedule for mirdametinib. We used a three weeks on, 1 week off schedule. So people took it for 3 weeks in a row, then took a 1 week vacation. We think that may contribute to some of the results I'll show you later. We did a safety follow-up at the conclusion of the trial, and we offered an optional long-term follow-up for all patients on the trial. I just learned this morning that we will continue to collect data on all of the patients who opted to continue until 2028. So we'll have a lot of long-term safety data for people taking this medicine. The primary endpoint of this study was looking at the volume of tumors. Just like we said, 20% was the definition of progression. If you reduce a tumor by 20%, that's a definition of response. And so every single patient on this trial had regular MRIs. The MRIs were done in a very specific way, so they were all reproducible from institution to institution. And then all the scans were sent out to a blinded, independent central review. I never talked to the radiologists, never saw them. They were totally blinded to the patients and what we were doing. There were two of them, and if they disagreed, there was a third radiologist who came in and said, okay, you guys, let's all come to an agreement about what the appropriate volume is. And by doing that, we were able to measure volumes accurately and have accurate data throughout the trial. The secondary endpoints included looking at duration of response, and we looked at patient-related or reported outcomes also, especially looking at pain, severity and interference, and health-related quality of life. And of course, safety and tolerability of the medicine was very important. This is our demographics, and you can see there was a pretty even spread between girls and boys. The median age for adults was 34, and our oldest patient was 69. In kids, our median age was 10, but we had kids ranging from the age of 2 to 17. The volume of the target plexiform neurofibroma, the minimum that was supposed to be enrolled on the trial was a volume of 5 cc's or 5 mLs, but one patient or a couple patients got in under that, and so we included them in this data. But I want you to note that the median volume in adults was about 196 mLs, or about 200 cc's. In children, it was about 100, but notice that there were patients that had plexiform neurofibromas that were about 3.5 liters in size. Imagine 3.5 liter pop bottles, and that defines the volume of those neurofibromas. The target plexiform neurofibroma that was progressing at child entry accounted for 31% in adults and 35% in kids. I'm sorry, 31 adults, which is 53%, 35 kids, which is 62%. And notice that the head and neck was the most common site. The extremities followed. There were some paraspinal neurofibromas that I showed you earlier that were on the trial, the torso, and then other locations. The morbidity associated with these tumors, the number one morbidity was pain. That was more common in adults, but certainly the most common reason in both adults and children. Disfigurement or major deformity was next, and then motor dysfunction or weakness, and then finally, we did have a few patients with airway dysfunction. Okay, I'll just whip through that. Okay. Finally, when we looked at pain scores at baseline, we had a range of 0 to 8.7 in adults. The median was about 4.7, and in kids, 0 to 9.2. A range of pain stuff. And in kids, if they were too young, the parents were proxy reporters of the kids' pain. So this is the objective response noted by blinded independent central review. And to walk you through this, this is called a swimmer plot. It's a statistical plot of data that we use that we think is attractive. But basically, everybody in blue had a partial response. Everybody in red had stable disease because their tumor didn't shrink by more than 20%. Progressive disease was seen in a few patients, and then there were a few patients who simply weren't available to be evaluated for a number of reasons. If you look inside the blue lines, The gold diamond marks the first time an objective response was seen. And then the blue diamond is when that response was confirmed. On our study, you had to have 2 MRIs in a row that showed the same thing to be able to be called a confirmed response. And you'll notice that some patients had responses within the first few months, but there were others who didn't have an objective response until 2 years out. So keeping people on these medicines for a long time are probably important to achieve the best response you can get. I tell everybody who comes into my clinic to begin MEK inhibitor treatment that they have to contract with me to stay on the medicine for a minimum of 180 days. And even at that, you can see that some people needed more than 180 days to achieve the responses that they desired. So the median duration of treatment on this study was 22 months. The median time to onset of response was 8 months, and we still have not reached the median duration of response. 85% of patients that completed the treatment, though, chose to continue in long-term follow-up. And I think that says something about the tolerability of this drug. We use the term deep and durable response. Depth has to do with this plot, which is called a waterfall plot, and it shows the percentage change in tumor size. So you can see on the far left, there are white bars in the patients who continued to progress despite starting on therapy. But then we have another group of patients whose tumors shrank, but didn't shrink by more than 20%. And then finally, a large group that did shrink by more than 20%. And I want you to notice on the far right, there's a number of patients who had responses way more than 50%. So the overall confirmed objective response rate, again, was 52%. An additional child achieved a confirmed partial response in long-term follow-up. That is beyond the 2 years that were prescribed. The median best change in tumor volume was 42% in kids, and the children with a confirmed objective response achieved a deep response in many cases, that is more than 50% tumor volume reduction. So we were certainly happy to see these data, and those of us who were individual caregivers were gratified by our individual patient responses. This is the adult data done in the very same way: partial responses, stable disease in red, and a number of adults who were not able to be evaluated. Some of them quit therapy early just because of complications of life or not able to tolerate the medicine. Partial responses were confirmed once again in a large number of patients, and a couple patients did have progressive disease later, and we noted that. This is the adult waterfall plot. The confirmed overall response rate, or objective response rate, I'm sorry, was 41%. 2 additional adults achieved a confirmed partial response, again, in the long-term follow-up phase, underlined the need to stay on this medicine longer. The median best change in tumor volume was 41%, and 62% of adults with confirmed objective responses achieved a deep response. That is, 60% of adults had a greater than 50% tumor volume reduction. This is looking at quality of life. HR is health-related, so health-related quality of life. In adults, people by the 3rd cycle started to have improvement in quality of life. And once they had an improvement in quality of life, this was sustained while they stayed on the medicine. On the children's side, you'll notice that there's a parent proxy report and self-report. The self-report is in black. That's a little lower and the parent proxy report is in blue. And I just want you to notice that by both reports, there was an improvement in quality of life for the kids on this medicine. And again, once it started, it was sustained as long as they were on the trial. In addition to this trial meeting its primary endpoint of confirmed objective response, adults and children with NF1 plexiform neurofibromas reported early, sustained, and clinically meaningful reductions in worst tumor pain severity and pain interference over the course of treatment. So because pain is a common morbidity and was the most commonly reported baseline morbidity in children, we took this very seriously. The current clinical practice recommendations indicate that plexiform neurofibroma-related pain is an important factor in treatment initiation decisions, and in most cases, the goal of treatment is improvement of plexiform neurofibroma-associated morbidity. Mirdametinib treatment, Gomekli, demonstrated statistically significant and clinically meaningful improvement in worst tumor pain and pain interference in both adults and children, including those with moderate to severe worst tumor pain severity. It's easy for us to measure tumor volumes on clinical trials where we have independently supported radiologists, but most NF treatment centers across the country can't do plexiform neurofibroma volumetrics. So what are my objectives when I'm treating a patient? My personal objective is to improve their quality of life. And if pain is a major impediment to that quality of life, I believe that pain should be the focus. And indeed, I was gratified to see that many people in my clinic had improvements in pain that allowed them to renew activities that they weren't able to pursue before. This is just the numbers on clinically meaningful improvement in worst tumor pain severity. On the left are adults, and you'll see by cycle 5, 59% of adults had some response, and 55% with moderate to severe worst pain responded. And then by cycle 13, that went up to nearly 80% of all patients on the trial. If you look at kids, the self-report in kids improved up to 57% by cycle 5 and 73% by cycle 13. If you look at kids with moderate to severe worst pain, 33% had improvement by cycle 5, but look at this, 100% had improvement by cycle 13, about 3 months of therapy. This analysis includes adults and children who could have achieved the clinically meaningful change threshold for the NRS-11, which is the pain measure we used. Okay, and this just shows what I showed you before as far as pain improvement during the trial and it being sustained as long as people were taking the medication. And this is worst tumor pain. And again, there was worst tumor pain reduction in both adults and children that was sustained during the trial. All right. So now that we know about mirdametinib and Gomekli and what it does for the patient, what are the things we worry about when we give Gomekli, or for that matter, any MEK inhibitor? Well, the number one problem we saw was skin. And these are all treatment-related adverse events reported in over 20% of patients in either the adult or the pediatric cohort. Acneiform dermatitis is just that. It looks a lot like acne. And we rarely encounter acneiform dermatitis in kids who are prepubertal. Most of those kids will have an eczematous-like reaction to the drug, and that can be prevented or at least ameliorated with bleach baths and good lotions, not stinky water-based ones, but nice petroleum-based odor-free lotions. And adults are counseled to start an antibiotic at the beginning of therapy, usually doxycycline if they can tolerate it and haven't had a history of allergy. We start doxycycline and keep people on it for about 3 months. And if we do that, they tolerate the medicine very well and have minimal rashes. Diarrhea can happen, and much of this is diet related. And so if you have people come in with perhaps lactose intolerance, or if they're heavy on to-go food, I would try to counsel them to take it easy on their diet, avoid fatty or greasy foods, and if milk is a problem, avoid milk. Nausea happens, and many kids with nausea and adults might have it for the first couple months, then it tends to get better, and vomiting can accompany that. Some patients were tired on the medicine, but again, much of that fatigue tends to go away over time. But I have had patients just be fatigued of taking the drug, and taking a drug twice a day can induce some form of treatment fatigue, if you will. The heart is an important organ for all of us. And when we have patients on MEK inhibitors, we do routine echocardiograms so we can watch how the heart squeezes. The ejection fraction is the amount of blood the left ventricle pushes out to the body. And we see ejection fraction decreases in some patients who take MEK inhibitors. Most of the time, these patients are asymptomatic. They may have a decreased ejection fraction, but it doesn't affect them. It doesn't affect their day-to-day life or activity. But we do watch it, and on this trial, we had very specific indications for stopping or interrupting the drug and waiting for the ejection fraction to improve. And by the way, once you stop exposure to the medicine, these ejection fractions do improve quickly, and either with dose reduction and frequently even resuming at the same dose as before, you don't see an ejection fraction decrease again. But it's still something that's important and something we always need to pay attention to. The creatine phosphokinase is an enzyme made by your muscles. And if you have muscle breakdown, that can leak into the blood. And everybody who takes a MEK inhibitor has some kind of creatine phosphokinase increase. Adults who take Lipitor or other statin products like that can also experience CK increases. So if you're an adult patient on one of those medicines and taking this, I'd certainly make sure your doctor is observing you carefully for that. And then finally, paronychia or swelling around the nail beds can happen. And again, with good hygiene and care, we are able to minimize that. On this trial, nobody had greater than a grade 3. That is, nobody had to stop therapy. But in the kids, you'll see that there were a number of kids who had lower grade paronychia that needed to be looked after. So we had serious treatment-related adverse events in one adult, and that one adult did have a number of complicating other factors and was improving at last follow-up. We did have interruptions of therapy due to treatment-related adverse events. There were dose reductions, which I'm totally comfortable with in this class of drugs. And then finally, discontinuations did happen due to treatment-related adverse events. So here are the take-homes. Mirdametinib demonstrated a deep and sustained tumor volume reduction and improvement in patient and parent proxy-reported pain and health-related quality of life in adults and children on this study. This is the largest NF1 plexiform neurofibroma trial to date, and it prospectively used blinded, independent central review to confirm the target tumor response. The primary endpoint of confirmed overall response was achieved in 41% of adults and 52% of children. The duration of response, the median duration of response, has not been reached at this time. And then in the long-term follow-up phase, additional adults and a child had a confirmed response. The largest median reduction in plexiform neurofibroma volume reported to date was seen on this trial, and it included deep responses, as I said, of greater than 50% tumor volume reduction. Improvements of pain were noted and quality of life, as I've said already. The safety profile was manageable, and as you get more and more used to managing patients on MEK inhibitors, you can really work to minimize interruptions or reductions in dose. And then finally, this is the first available dispersible tablet formulation for an FDA-approved MEK inhibitor. And for adults and children with difficulty swallowing, that's great. And no fasting requirement is important too. So that's the end of my talk, but it's not the end, because we really, really, really need to thank the patients and families who participated in this study. Yes, those who were receiving this medicine wanted to get better. Their families wanted them to get better, but all of them were looking forward to other people who might have plexiform neurofibromas in the future who need medical therapy. They were all contributing to making life better for people who came after them. My clinic nurses and the clinic nurses around the country who helped with this trial, the research assistants, the CRAs who worked very hard and at many centers had an FDA audit like ours, really contributed in a major way to making this happen. The study monitors and the people on the SpringWorks team really made this possible and worked equally hard at making sure that everything turned out as well as it could for all the patients on the trial. So thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions. Simon, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I was just thanking you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Moertel. This is terrific information. I just wanted to repeat again for our audience that we are recording today. We'll put this on our YouTube channel and on our treatments page on the website. So if you missed anything or want to go back and see some of the information that Dr. Moertel gave, please do so. One of the questions, before I get to the questions for Dr. Moertel, and there were tons of them, so I'm going to try to group them together for him. One of the things we've been seeing already online is people already mentioning this treatment to their doctor and their doctor not being aware of the treatment. Obviously, this is brand new news. We're also going to encourage you to, when you reach back to your doctor, take this recording and send it to them, as well as the link to the treatments page on the site, which I think we've posted and we'll post again, and just let them know that it's here, it's live. And we also had a few questions of people asking about other countries and SpringWorks. I'm not speaking for them, but I am aware that they are applying in the European Medicines Agency, so you should look for that too. So there were a lot of questions, Dr. Moertel, around side effects. I think you actually covered a lot of that here. So I don't know that we'll go. Let's see if we can do a few other things. Another common theme was people asking, I'm just going to read a couple of questions. They all sort of fall in that same category of, did the tumors grow again after people stopped treatment? In cases in which you had to decrease dosage due to adverse effects, did you still see decrease in tumor volume? Are there details about ejection fraction decrease and blood creatinine in your data in terms of dose reduction and restarting on the drug and how it affected those patients? So I think people are trying to understand, if I come on or off the treatment and what might have impacted during the trial.
Mm-hmm. Well, I showed you the one patient very early in my talk who was treated with selumetinib, and we saw what we've all gotten used to seeing in our field, this rebound effect when patients interrupt therapy. And so I think my longest patient in my clinic on MEK inhibitor is 8 years now and continues to take the medicine to control her tumor. And I know that there are people around the country who have patients on MEK inhibitors for at least that long. It underlines, it underscores the fact that patients who take inhibitor drugs like this, it's not just an episode in time like treating a strep throat. This is something people need to remain on for quite some time. You heard me talk about my contract of 18 months on therapy minimum. And even for patients who have been on these therapies for 18 months, we frequently see rebound after stopping the medicine. Go back to the chart I showed you about growth rate at different ages. Certainly, the risk of rebound is higher at a younger age than it is at an older age, but we still need to keep that in mind. When patients had had medication interruptions, we tried to make those as brief as we could to avoid the rebound effect. And we learned very early on regarding heart stuff, for instance, that the heart recovery was very quick, sometimes in 10 to 14 days. And so that allowed us to continue the medicine. And again, regarding dose and dose reductions, there are a lot of these MEK inhibitors who have very broad dose response effects depending on the patient who's taking them. So many patients can get away with a much lower dose than other patients. Many patients will tolerate the drug at higher doses, and other patients won't be able to tolerate those. So the standard dose is coming out of phase 1 and phase 2 work we're doing. But I think that as patients and doctors get used to these medicines over time, they'll realize that dose reductions are not as harmful as one might think.
I think another couple people asked, and this is somewhat related, that if someone comes off the treatment, is there the risk that the tumor might actually come back more aggressively than it would have otherwise?
We don't really see an aggressiveness, but I think in many cases the rebound can be aggressive. I just had a patient who stopped therapy, and he was part of the long-term follow-up cohort. So he was on the therapy for about 3 years. And it was 1 year after he stopped the therapy that he started to have a recurrence of his pain. And when we looked at his MRI, we saw that his plexiform neurofibroma had started to grow again and obviously started to cause pain again. So looking at size isn't the only thing we pay attention to. We certainly pay attention to quality of life and pain measures as indicators for restarting the drug, if you will.
We have another couple questions similar to each other. Now that we have, I'll read 2 of them. Now that we have 2 therapies for PN, do you anticipate the standard of care changing to doing full body surveillance on a regular basis to start treating the PN before they become too large? And then relatedly, a lot of doctors have a wait and see approach. Do you think that's dated? Is it important to have the full body MRI?
Yeah. Well, you know, for many years, we've operated under the what you see is what you get paradigm. And I think as long as we keep in mind what plexiform neurofibromas might do, paying attention to pain, paying attention to other things that might impact quality of life, then we'll have a different threshold for when to do an MRI. I always depend on what I call MOMDAR. If the moms think there's something going on, then I always pay attention to it. Nothing against the dads in the audience, but that's just the way it is. In my practice, I usually encourage people to have a whole body MRI when they're transitioning out of my pediatric clinic to my adult clinic, so we know what's going on before they get into an age where they'll need to buy their own insurance and things like that. It's all knowledge is power. And we also see some people with the spinal form of neurofibromatosis who may not exhibit the features of what those spinal neurofibromas are doing until they're older. And so knowing about that at an earlier time is better. I have a really hard time supporting whole body MRI for very young children, given the risk of sedation and other things that might go with it. As I said, I just keep my eye on the MOMDAR and make sure that I'm paying attention.
We have a whole bunch of questions, probably not surprisingly, on people asking about the difference between selumetinib and mirdametinib, and or the difference between Koselugo and Gomekli and which one should they take? Is
Yeah.
basically- yeah.
Well, number one, this is the first MEK inhibitor for plexiform neurofibroma that's available for adults. And I've always been a proponent of using medications that are approved on label for a specific indication. And so if you're an adult that is over 18 and have a plexiform neurofibroma that's causing pain or quality of life issues, I would highly recommend not going off label. That is, take the on-label medication. For patients who haven't been able to swallow capsules, now you have an on-label liquid formulation that you can make, and it's FDA approved. I know that there's another MEK inhibitor that has a liquid form available, but they have never pursued FDA approval for their drug for patients with NF1. They're happy to get off-label prescriptions and make money on that. But if you're not going to go to the effort, I don't think you deserve to be in the marketplace.
I think we still have some time. Another few questions related actually to gender, because I think of one of your slides. According to the chart, female patients represented a larger portion of each cohort. Was this an irrelevant mix of available patients, or is there evidence that gender may play a role? And then I think someone else asked a similar question about, for early teenage girls, should they pursue Koselugo or Gomekli or both?
Mm-hmm. We, in doing other studies on for cutaneous neurofibromas, for instance, we saw more significant impact if those cutaneous neurofibromas were causing cosmetic issues, for instance, of the face, neck, or exposed parts of the body. I think that some female patients might, especially adult female patients, might come to us sooner for those indications than some male patients might. That's pure speculation. Otherwise, I think it just boils down to, even though this is the largest study ever done, the numbers are still relatively small. And so I don't want to put too much importance on that, other than my opinion I just threw out.
You mentioned cutaneous. We're actually getting a lot of questions about, not today's topic, but NFX 179. So we did post a link for people to go back and watch that webinar. I don't know if that's something you want to talk about or.
No, I just think I'm grateful that people are paying attention to that, because for my adult patients, it's certainly a huge problem. And I'm just glad that patients like companies like Inflection are paying attention to that.
We're also getting lots of questions about taking Gomekli with other drugs. There were a few drugs mentioned, but I don't know if you could comment on that in general.
Yeah, I think the main interactions tend to be with some of the anti-epileptic drugs, but I definitely encourage everybody who goes on this medicine and is taking a number of other medications to have a medication review with a pharmacist and be knowledgeable about the interactions that are there. And a good PharmD and a good doctor paying attention to what their PharmD says will do right by you.
Just reading through questions, lots and lots of great questions. For folks who are asking specifically about access to the drug, please visit gomekli.com for information about that.
For my hands.
Yeah, exactly. As you can imagine, there's a lot of questions about cost and things like that too. So SpringWorks has done a great job. Again, gomekli.com. If we can post that in the chat as well. And they have a patient connections program that will work with you on access to the treatment.
Yeah, and I think that both the Koselugo people and the Gomekli people are really doing a good job of building an infrastructure to help patients, knowing that for many patients this is financially burdensome, or there might be insurance hoops to get through. So I'd really encourage providers and patients to use the resources that are out there. Heck, they're free and probably helpful.
And if after this webinar, if you can't remember which sites to go to ctf.org, go to the For Patients tab, and you'll see one of the menu items says treatments. click on that, and we'll have links to both Gomekli and Koselugo and their patient connection programs so that you can reach those items, or again, watch this video afterwards. There are a few questions here. I think we can take maybe one or two more on how does someone know when to stop taking the treatment?
You know what? I've been part of many, many conversations addressing that issue. And it's a hard one. I think it really depends on how you're tolerating the medicine, what benefit you're getting from the medicine, and a serious conversation with your treating provider. I think it's very individual. I know that some pediatric providers might make a decision to stop at age 18 to see what happens. And I've heard that talked about, but I really do think it's a highly individual decision, and one to be made with very careful consideration with your doctor or nurse.
A few questions here on, is there any data related to MPNST? And then someone else asked about its effect on GIST.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We know there are a number of tumors that are dependent on an NF1 alteration to drive them. And GIST is one, MPNST is one, but many of these tumors have an additional mutation also. So we know that MEK inhibitors alone, we know this both from laboratory and real world experience, MEK inhibitors alone do not prevent MPNST, nor are they an effective treatment alone for MPNST. You've brought up a really good point about clinical trials for other tumors we see in NF1, specifically GIST. And I do believe that that needs to be an area of focus in the future. And keep in mind too, that the risk of breast cancer in women with neurofibromatosis is much higher than the general population. And if therapies don't include consideration for NF1 as a driver of those tumors, they may be falling short. So the areas of research for NF1 and prevention and treatment, it's wide open right now. And it's up to the advocacy community to really help scientists and treating physicians to focus on the conditions that are important to them.
Yeah, there was a few also related, different, but any effectiveness on low-grade gliomas. So a few parents of young children.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't speak to that directly, but I will tell you that selumetinib is in clinical trials for low-grade gliomas, and I know that there's at least one institution that started using mirdametinib in early trials for low-grade gliomas, and I have no data to share about that right now. You are probably aware that there are a number of clinical trials for NF1 patients with optic glioma, randomizing patients between what we considered classical chemotherapy and MEK inhibitor, and those trials are still in process.
I think we're going to do one more. Someone asked, do people see a reduction in pain when they're on this treatment? And I think you did talk to this at one point.
I tried to focus on that, and maybe that was a question before I really got to it, but yeah, and for me as a treating physician, the focus on pain and quality of life is pretty much my sole focus. I don't pay a lot of attention to MRIs. I really listen to my patients and whether the medicine is helping their pain, and it does.
I think that's going to make a lot of people happy. And the other thing making people happy, frankly, Dr. Moertel, is you. The other, I didn't read all of them, but we'll send you the transcript. Lots of gratitude for you. Lots of comments thanking you for today and also for the work that you've done. And that comes from everyone on the call, but also obviously from us at the Children's Tumor Foundation, and I'm sure from the folks at SpringWorks as well. I think we've come to the end. We've hit our hour. We tried to get to as many questions as we could. I apologize if there's some that we missed. That we do have the full list, and we'll try to get back to you, or just reach out to us at info@ctf.org. We can also connect you with Kate Keltz, as I mentioned before, our usual host, and who directs our patient education and engagement programs. Certainly talk to your doctor. Is really the first front line. Visit gomekli.com, visit ctf.org. We've put a lot of these in chat, and we'll send a follow-up email with these links as well. We've gotten to this moment, frankly, again, as I said at the beginning, I'll say again now, because of you, because of the patient community. So for everyone who supported the Children's Tumor Foundation and other groups and who have funded medical research, for everyone who has participated, for everyone who shares information, for everyone who even just joined us today. Like I said, I think we're at nearly 600 people registered, and we had a similar group of people last week as well. We're very excited to be able to do this for you, and we are not done. We're with Dr. Moertel's help and other amazing clinicians and researchers in the NF community and behind, we are not going to stop until we have treatments for all forms of NF, NF1, NF2 related schwannomatosis and schwannomatosis. To learn more about all those things, as I've mentioned, we do have information on our treatments page on ctf.org. We also want to encourage you to join us at the NF Summit. So this is our annual gathering of patients and families, doctors, clinicians, researchers, really the NF community. This year it happens alongside the NF conference, our big scientific meeting. So we're expecting well over 1,000 people to attend this June. The summit is June 19 to June 21st in Washington, D.C. The conference immediately following is June 21 to 25, I think. You can find all this information, I think, in our chat, because our amazing team here, thank you, has been posting links. But certainly visit nfsummit.org and nfconference.org for information on those as well. And again, thank you. Dr. Moertel, thank you very much for everything you've done. And have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend, everybody.
Can I inject politics quickly?
Yes.
Remember that a lot of the formative work was supported by the NIH and indirect costs from the NIH, and you as an advocacy community can help funding for institutions that carry on work that benefit you. So do your best to get ahead of this. I'm not trying to be political. I'm trying to help you to see days like today happen again in the future.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. And that's also a good reminder and a segue that we are on the forefront in Washington as well, monitoring these issues and making sure that NF research gets funded the way it should be and the way it needs to be. So thank you, Dr. Moertel, for reminding us of that. And stay tuned. We'll certainly update you about what's going on in DC as when and if we need to take more action. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks. Bye-bye.